Here is what we're going to do. Suze, can you spotlight me, or I'll leave you to do that. So let me tell you what we're going to do for this evening, and how I think we can make the best use of our time together. First of all, this came from a request that people wanted some background information about what's going on in Israel, and just to sort of some, a lay of the land, if you will. And then I was going to take some questions, and if we have time, and certainly if we feel that we need to kind of do a part 2 or even a part 3, we can do that. Rabbi Susie will, I expect we'll go for about an hour, and Rabbi Susie will wrap us up with a prayer at the conclusion. I know that I would imagine, so let me first say that I would imagine that everyone's hearts are torn, and that we are all beside ourselves in terms of what's happening and what has happened in Israel. It is devastating, to say the least. As of this morning, at least when I read, 1,300 people in Israel lost their lives. 3,000 are injured, and depending on the reports, approximately 150 people taken hostage. But what I'm going to do first, I want to take a step back and give us to some basic facts about how we kind of arrived at this situation, and a little bit about where this might be going. And then, as I said, entertain questions. And questions, this is not an opportunity for us to share, to get into our own views, as much as trying just to clarify the issues at hand. So I'm going to go back really to step 1, and that is the State of Israel was created in terms of the UN partition plan in 1948. And as a result of the armistice agreement in 1949 between the Arab states that attacked Israel, and Israel, the State of Israel's boundaries were formed. That's often called the Green Line, what was Israel from 1948. It's somewhat like people say it was a green line on the map. I'm not 100% sure, but it's called the Green Line. And the Green Line, just to give a sense, went straight through Jerusalem. So that is the divide today between what people call East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. And that is what people will also sometimes call Israel proper, within the Green Line. And so that was from 1949 to 67. Though things shifted dramatically in 1967. And it should also be noted, and I think this is an important fact, the Palestinians never had sovereignty over the land, over Gaza or any of this land. They were represented, in a sense, in 48 by the Arab states. I don't think they were represented well, but that's besides the point. They were represented by the Arab states who rejected the partition plan. Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip from 49 to 67. Jordan controlled East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Syria controlled the Golan Heights. In 1967, Israel captured, a lot of territory in the Six-Day War. It captured the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and it captured the Gaza Strip from Egypt. It captured the Golan Heights from Syria. It captured the West Bank from Jordan and East Jerusalem from Jordan. And that was then the 67 borders that were expanded. Now, many people say, thank God Israel had the Golan Heights and the Sinai Peninsula in particular in the 73 Yom Kippur War, because those territories allowed Israel to absorb that surprise attack in the 73 war. Israel was attacked in the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. Syria and Egypt never made it into what I just termed Israel proper. They made significant inroads, in particular in the Golan Heights and also in the Sinai Peninsula. Then after the 73 war, that led to the peace agreement with Egypt, and Israel withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula and to gain peace with Egypt. And part of that discussion in those peace agreements was what to do with Gaza. And guess what? The Egyptians did not want Gaza. As much as Israel tried, as much as Israel tried, Egypt, in a sense, didn't even want to talk about Gaza, and it was left to Israel. It's often forgotten, by the way, that Israel had settlements in the Sinai Peninsula that they evacuated when in the peace agreement with Egypt. Israel made a peace agreement with Jordan, and basically Jordan relinquished its desire to the West Bank. In other words, it said, okay, that's not really of our objective anymore. We want a peace agreement with Israel, and in particular, one of Jordan's pressing needs was water supplies. There is no peace agreement with Syria and Lebanon, and the Golan Heights remains in Israeli control. The Gaza Strip is sort of then in its own category. Egypt didn't want it back. Israel had it. Israel settled the Gaza Strip. There were settlements. And then in 2005, Israel decided under Ariel Sharon to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. And here's where really the difficulties begin. And by the way, just to sort of back up a little bit, so there's settlers, about 9,000 settlers who are living in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army has to maintain a military presence in the Gaza Strip. There were difficulties in the Gaza Strip throughout this time, but it was, a lot of their efforts were protecting those settlers who lived there. Ariel Sharon was from the right wing of Israeli politics, and he said two things about the withdrawal from Gaza. He said, number one, it's much more defensible from a military perspective to have a straight line and an agreed upon boundary than to have a group of people living here and a division of soldiers protecting them, or here or there. That was his argument. The second argument was there are about now 2.2 million Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip, which is probably the most densely populated area in the world. And Ariel Sharon said, well, we'll take those 2.2 million Palestinians out of the demographic equation. Then if we withdraw from the Gaza Strip, that they won't become part of the calculus in terms of overwhelming the Jewish majority for the Jewish state. That was the argument in 2005. Now, we were in Israel for this summer of the disengagement, and it felt, Shira was 12, we celebrated her bat mitzvah there. It felt like the country was going to be ripped apart. There were those who, you wore an orange ribbon if you were against the disengagement, you wore a blue and white if you were for the disengagement. And I remember Shira's favorite color is still orange, and we didn't want her to wear any orange as a consequence. We just didn't want her to be, in the political kind of debate as a 12-year-old mostly. And it was quite tense. Israel withdrew from Gaza. Israel had to, with great difficulty, carry settlers out almost in some instances, and great pain. And there are people who have argued that the failure of the Israeli government to adequately provide for those 9,000 settlers who gave up their homes for the sake of the disengagement, who were never really cared for, that was a sore point and a festering wound that has given rise to some of the right-wingers in the current government. Like, you abandoned us, and we made this great sacrifice for the state of Israel. That was 2005. Now, the Palestinian Authority controls Gaza at this point. And then the Gazans are going to have a democratic election. Israeli security people said, hey, if there's a democratic election, Hamas is going to win, and then we're in even a more difficult situation. President Bush at that time said, I am all for, paving the way for democracy in the Middle East. So we have to make sure this vote happens. And guess what? Hamas won and has controlled the territory ever since. And that's basically where we sit. And there have been different attacks back and forth from Gaza throughout the years, rocket attacks, infiltration, a small terrorist cell, nothing ever close to approaching the magnitude of the attack that happened on Saturday. Israel was clearly complacent and had a great deal of faith in its border fence, and a great deal of, and obviously in retrospect, too much faith in its intelligence services that didn't foresee such a disastrous and painful and murderous attack. That's what sort of got us here. The other thing that needs to be clearly said, Hamas has no interest in making peace with Israel. They want to destroy the Jewish state. The distinction that I offer between the Green Line and Israel proper and the territories and Israel is not a distinction that Hamas makes. They believe that Israel and the Zionist enterprise is a colonial European foreign implant on the Muslim Middle East. And Israel needs to be destroyed. They don't make a distinction between these boundaries or these territories that I might. And I think that's an extremely important point to hold on to in this struggle. Most likely what will happen in the near term is that Israel in the next week, or probably another week after significant pounding by artillery and by the Air Force, will send in ground forces. I expect that this is going to be a protracted and bloody struggle, and that there will be more Israeli soldiers who lose their lives and innocent Palestinians who lose their lives. And that is going to be the tragedy that will be unfolding in the next several months. I would expect it would take that long. But the Israeli public will, I don't think, stand for anything less than defanging Hamas and removing their ability to attack Israel and Israelis who are just trying to live their lives and in neighboring towns and neighboring developments. That's most likely what is going to happen. And I mean, I'm not a military expert, but that seems to be what everything is being said in the Israeli press. That's one piece. The other thing that you may have heard is that Israel maintained a blockade of the Gaza Strip. That's partially true. Israel controls most of the borders that surround the Gaza Strip. Egypt controls the southernmost border. That is not a porous border from Egypt's perspective either. Israel lets in a great deal of supplies into the Gaza Strip, but the difficulty Israel has, and I'm not suggesting Israel does this perfectly, but the difficulty that Israel has is how do you distinguish between things that could be used to build a home that could also be used to build a rocket or a bomb? These are impossible distinctions to make. I mean, food and medicine are easy in a sense. But when you're talking about building materials, when you're talking about that Hamas diverts the lion's share of the cement that's brought in to build tunnels, and that Palestinian children lose their lives building these tunnels because the Hamas uses children because they're smaller to dig these tunnels, and when they collapse, they die. How do you make a distinction between something that can be used to build a house and something that can be used to build a tunnel or build a bomb? That's the situation Israel faces. Israel also, by and large, controls the power grid that goes in and out of Gaza, and it does this imperfectly too. What do you do in a situation when these tools are being used against you, even though you want to respond in a humanitarian basis? That's the basic contours that I think I could offer in terms of this, where we sit today and at this moment. I want to give everyone a chance I want to have people ask questions. I hope you can keep them to questions so that I can offer further clarification about the situation. So if you can also raise your hand, that would be enormously helpful. This is the question part. Susie, you going to help me with this? Bonnie, go ahead. Thanks for raising your hand. You got to unmute yourself, Bonnie.
Got it. Okay, technical difficulties. Okay, playing devil's advocate here.
Mm-hmm.
So other than our faith and historically, how do we justify that how do you counter-argue that Israel is not a colonialist extension and has a right to exist?
So here would be my counter to that. So there's two, I think, answers. One is, it's very important from a Zionist perspective and a Jewish perspective that we return to the land of Israel. In other words, we didn't come just from Europe to Israel. That's where we were going back thousands of years. This is a coming home for Jews. And that's number one, what Israel represents. But many Israelis believe that they would like to be able to affirm both their right to self-determination and the Palestinians' right to self-determination. The two do not have to be mutually exclusive. And the UN partition plan, of course, didn't make them mutually exclusive. They affirmed both of those rights. And so that's the key point. The problem that most Israelis have is that they believe that and evidence, you can understand Saturday's evidence would suggest otherwise, that Palestinian leaders and Hamas in particular, and even some from the Palestinian Authority, seem more intent on destroying Israel than building a Palestinian state. And so that is their difficulty. So I think that's how you would answer it. Even though Zionism started in Europe, I hear part of the question. The idea of returning to Zion is a very old idea. And look, let's be honest also. 600,000 Palestinians approximately left their homes when the state of Israel was created. What I call the War of Independence, Palestinians call the Nakba, the destruction. And so it's important to hear that. It's difficult to hear and it's difficult to say. But Palestinian, I see this as the War of Independence. I see this the war that gave us a state, that allowed us to be able to freely sing Hatikva. And Palestinians see this the day that they lost their homes. And there's all sorts of different, some people left willingly, some were forced to leave, some thought they would come back to an even bigger land after the Arab armies won. It is an extremely complicated story and episode in Israel's history. Israel didn't handle everything perfectly in vis-a-vis the Palestinians who lived there, but 600,000 left their homes. And they were brought to Palestinian refugee camps, some of which are in the Gaza Strip, some of which are in the West Bank, some of which are in Lebanon and other Arab countries, one of which is right inside the Jerusalem. And they have stayed there for generations, by and large. The Arab leadership has seen it as a way of perpetuating this idea that Palestinians were kicked out and lost their homes and not figuring out a better way of repatriating them. So a refugee camp, your grievances can fester. And Hamas has an interest in allowing those grievances to keep going. They capitalize on that. Some in the Israeli leadership do too, but Hamas, I think, is the most guilty. There's some questions in the chat. Rabbi Susie, can you help me with those?
Jeffrey asked, his iPhone asks, do the Palestinian people generally support Hamas, or is there a significant percentage who oppose Hamas?
It's hard to get a gauge on the numbers. So I would like to believe, and perhaps this is naive, that most Palestinians do not support Hamas and certainly don't support the terrorism that they just did. I believe that to be the case, but anyone who speaks very strongly in protest to Hamas is not given, is treated very harshly. I mean, Hamas does not encourage dissent. It is a violent government, and it deals with its own citizens in a violent way. So I don't even know if you can call them citizens, but it deals with it in a violent way. So gauging who's opposed and who's not. I would like to believe that most Palestinians want a state of their own and a home of their own and be able to live in comfort and freedom and to live side by side with Israel, but the suggestion seems otherwise. At least the evidence seems otherwise. There's another question, I think, Rabbi Susie.
Bonnie just commented, and the Jews were summarily kicked out of Arab lands as well.
Yes.
And no Arab land, I'm just going to add, would take nobody wanted the Palestinians who were kicked out of Israel either.
Right. So about an equal number, and probably slightly more, 700,000 by some suggestions, were were kicked out. Jews were kicked out of Arab countries. They, of course, were welcomed to Israel with open arms and became citizens of Israel, or left to other countries. Lisa has a question, raised her hand. Lisa, is that you, Mitch?
Hey, Rabbi. Thank you. Very interesting. You know, I'm not very well read on any of this, so I just would like to ask you a question. How plausible do you think John Kirby's statement was today that Iran had nothing to do with this and the U.S. government has no idea if Iran had anything to do with it, and the connection with not only releasing the $6 billion for the hostage release, but allowing the oil sanctions to be relaxed, where Iran has amassed $60 billion evading sanctions. And how plausible is Iran in this whole situation?
Look, I saw that too, in terms of that, you know, the intelligence services are suggesting that Iran, they can't find, I think the way the statement was something along, they don't have direct evidence that Iran was involved, and Iranian leaders were surprised by Hamas's attack and so forth. I find that, to be perfectly honest, somewhat implausible. I mean, I think Iran's hand is there, even if it's the minimal financial support. And my worry in all of the agreements that we made with Iran, which I understand the intention of the Obama administration and even the Biden administration, that if we can figure out a way of getting along with Iran, maybe we can soften their edge, if you will. I mean, that's the argument. My great worry was the amount of money that Iran would get a hold of and what nefarious ends they would put that to. I mean, we know that Iran is deeply involved in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and Israel periodically attacks sort of the supply chain from Iran through Syria to Lebanon, and Iran clearly supports, at the very least financially, Hamas. Whether they were involved in the planning stages of this, I don't know, but Iran.
When I was on the American Jewish Committee website, I don't know, webinar today, and there was a soldier who said that this was newly released information, that they found some Hamas terrorists who were dead, and they found pamphlets on their bodies showing that
they were from ISIS. It was ISIS.
ISIS.
Yes.
Mhm.
Look, I do believe that there were early reports that some of the Hamas terrorists were speaking Farsi, which is the language of Iran. I don't know. This is obviously above my security clearance. All of this speculation. There is an axis that, in terms of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, who want to destroy America, want to destroy Israel, and will go to great ends of that. I mean, how much they're working together and hand in hand, I don't know. I think it would almost be, I would say this, if there is absolutely definitive proof that Iran is involved, I think then this war escalates significantly. And that's actually very worrisome for everything that's going on, and for Israel as well as us. It's already.
That was my next question.
Don't you think the timing is kind of interesting, as Saudi Arabia was just about to make a deal with Israel and create some sort of diplomatic agreements?
Yeah, but here's the thing. Michael Oren, he was on a podcast with Barry Weiss that I listened to, Honestly with Barry Weiss, it was like the day after, it was like Sunday's podcast. And Michael Oren absolutely believes that, Iran was involved in this, and Iran wanted first and foremost to derail the peace negotiations with Saudi Arabia. That was their primary goal. I think I want to just put this out there. This is somewhat secondary because Hamas wants to destroy Israel. And let's also be honest, its charter is deeply anti-Semitic. It showed that its goal is to murder Jews. I mean, it's in full display from Saturday's events that this is their goal and this is what they want to do. So that it's almost doesn't. Israel's enemy is at its doorstep. It has to deal with that. That's the larger issue. It has to be able to ensure the people who live in those communities nearby are safe and can go about their daily lives. That's every country's and government's primary responsibility, is to protect its citizens. And that is what Israel first and foremost has to reestablish.
So can I ask you a question?
Let's Lisa, I want to just give other people some time.
There are a lot.
There's a lot of questions. So Lisa, I don't mean to, I love you, but I want to let other people go. Okay.
Okay.
Kind
of in a different direction where we are right now. Should we be nervous about being in New York City this weekend? We've heard about Islamic Jihad. We've heard about attacks. I've heard about Jews dressing up non-Jews dressing up as rabbis and asking people if they were Jewish. I don't know if that was credible, but
my seventh graders shared that too.
Me too.
So I guess it's something going around seventh graders. So I understand fear. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It wants to terrorize us, not just those Israelis who live nearby. I do believe that we can't allow it to kind of seep into our hearts and change what we are doing. Should we be careful? Should we read the news? Yes. I can't speculate about these reports. I'm deeply concerned about how these things blow up on social media. And I do think that part of the problem, and this is exactly what Hamas is leveraging, is how dialed into social media people are, and how they can create hysteria by just one pronouncement. So I think we have to be on guard against that, as well as make sure our security is up to par. Cheryl, you raised your hand.
Unmute.
I got it. My question is, with literally watching news like everybody else here nonstop, why is there no discussion that no other Arab countries are helping? No other Arab countries are sticking in to help the people in Gaza. Why is it just the responsibility of the Israelis?
Well, as I said earlier, Egypt didn't want Gaza back. So unfortunately, Arab leaders have by and large not wanted to deal with the Palestinian problem, except for when it serves their own ends. I mean, the Gulf states
why are none of the, no one on the news, nothing ever questions, where are the people from Egypt? Where are the people from Syria? Where are the people? No one's asking those. I don't get why these questions never come up.
I'm not sure I'm completely following it, but I think there are people protesting in support of Hamas.
No, I understand. There are plenty of people. Excuse me? So why aren't they letting them? There are plenty of people. I see the protests. But why isn't anybody saying, well, where are your other Arab nations?
Other countries have tried to, offer aid and support, the Gulf states in particular. But the difficulty is this. I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization that controls the Gaza Strip. So how much autonomy can one provide to that area when you have an organization who says its stated goal wants to destroy its neighbor? How much freedom do you want to, offer? And that's Israel's, difficulty. It wants to respond humanely to the Palestinian people, but the leaders who are controlling that territory want only to destroy it. So how much leeway can you grant? I think that's where they're stuck. They get money from other countries, but that's it.
But they're not offering to take people from that area.
Yeah. So here's something that's not as well known. The United Nations has a refugee, I forgot what it's called, but there's a refugee organization, entity within the United Nations. That entity, its purpose is that when someone becomes a refugee, the United Nations agency tries to repatriate them to their the country where they came from. If that's impossible, they work to resettle them in another country. Palestinians have not just one, but two separate United Nations organizations that are devoted solely to Palestinian refugees. And their goal is not necessarily to help them relocate to a new country or rebuild their lives, but to keep that situation going. It has a different mission statement. Thank you, Mark, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
UNRWA also.
Right? UNRWA is for the Palestinians, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Brad says, we can't negotiate with a country that wants to wipe you off the map. Only language they understand is strength. And then JW asks, so I understand the outrage, but what is the end game for Israel? If the goal is to destroy Hamas, what will emerge in its place?
So I was actually emailing with a friend this morning. The calculus in Israel has been, up until this moment, the enemy we know is better than the enemy we don't know. Like that they've always sort of been, okay, we're going to respond to this one terrorist attack by Hamas, or we're going to kill these Hamas leaders, or we're going to destroy this weapons depot, and so on and so forth. But it's never been to completely destroy Hamas, because there's always been the worry about, like, well, something worse could emerge. I mean, let's be honest. ISIS emerged out of our going into Iraq. I'm not suggesting that the U.S. is to blame, but you try to destroy one thing, and sometimes something else is even worse than before. But Israelis, by and large, today this is unacceptable, the current situation. So we're going to roll, I mean, this is putting it really crassly, we're going to roll the dice. We don't know what's going to come out at the end, on the other side, and it could in fact be worse. But this today is absolutely unacceptable, and we have to make sure Hamas does not have the ability to attack us, and those that did attack us and those who planned on attacking us, who planned the attack, are held accountable and responsible. That's the sentiment in Israel. That's why there's a unity government now. Because they have an emergency government, because pretty much everyone agrees in Israel, this can't stand. Something has to be done. It could end up being, Gaza is going to be in worse shape than it currently is, for sure. And the humanitarian situation in Gaza is going to be far worse than it already is. Mark, you raised your hand.
So, Rabbi, thank you for having me join you here. And so my question is from a pastoral point of view. So playing off of what you're talking about, certainly the feeling in Israel is that this can never be allowed to happen again. the left and the right in Israel, which is as divided as it is here in this country, is certainly united on that. And what the horrific things that took place on Saturday morning, which we don't have to go into it. But what is the solution to that? So we can perhaps agree that the populace of Gaza does not agree with Hamas, but they're prisoners of this gang, for lack of a better term, is controlling the situation. And the collective punishment that's taking place now. How do we, revenge is, we all want the revenge on some level, because, the Rubicon was crossed. But, how do we reconcile that with the images, of course, of the innocent Palestinians that are being killed? And it's only a matter of time, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened. I gave it till Tuesday. It's Thursday now, before the public sentiment turns against Israel. Perhaps it's next Tuesday that happens, but it will happen when enough of these pictures come out. So
Yeah, look.
So I look for your, rabbinic,
Look,
not
I
facts,
I
but-
am pained by the already there's reported 1,600 Palestinians were killed in Gaza. I think that's what I read today, and thousands more injured. I am pained by the suffering of Palestinians, and I don't believe, however, that Israel has much choice. I do believe that Israel does not, and I think this is really important to say, Israel does not intentionally target Palestinian civilians. Hamas intentionally targets civilians. It wants to murder Jews. It celebrates the murder of children. When Israel makes a mistake in fighting its wars, as it has, and as it will inevitably do, there will be an errant missile that will hit something, God forbid, and innocent Palestinians will be killed. They meant to hit, weapons depot, bad intelligence, whatever it is. It's going to happen because this is war. Israel will investigate that. The army will say, what did we do wrong? How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? This is not what we intended. This is not, its intention is to protect its citizens, and it's doing so in a very difficult situation. We can't expect it. I mean, I would like it to, but we can't expect it to act perfectly or always make, the absolute perfect decisions. But one of my teachers, Tal Becker, said once that our role here is to serve as a character witness for Israel. In other words, we don't have to be comfortable and defend every single decision that the Israeli army makes. Some might make us uncomfortable. Some we might think are justified. But we can serve as character witnesses that they are toiling over these decisions, and they are making difficult decisions in an extraordinarily difficult situation, and they are trying to make sure that their citizens can sleep at night and that they don't have to run to a safe room because rockets are being showered on them, or that infiltrators are coming through a tunnel to try to kill families. That's what it's trying to ensure. The collective punishment piece, in terms of sealing the border, cutting off the electricity, is very difficult. And I don't think that Israel's going to, that was an initial response. I would like to believe that it won't go on as it will only go on as long as necessary, if you will, because Israel had difficulty resealing that border. And so they first had to instill confidence, like, okay, we got the border under control now. And I think that was part of that whole calculus. It's that part makes me uncomfortable. That Israel controls the electricity for Gaza. They're the only ones who are able to. Otherwise, there would be even greater humanitarian suffering. Now, I know that one person asked, I saw in the chat, why is Israel supplying electricity to Gaza when they're just firing rockets at them? Like, why not they just cut it off completely? You know, there's two responses to that. Is one, I would like to believe that Israel tries to live to a higher and greater standard, and that it has a humanitarian concern for just the ordinary people who are living in Gaza. But number two, there's also a strategic calculus. And I'll just give you a very crass example. When the sewage plant in Gaza stops working because it doesn't have enough electricity, the crap that is, from that sewage plant ends up clogging, the desalination plant in Ashkelon. You can't pretend that even though there's a border, these lands are not connected. You can't just say, ooh, I don't want to deal with it, hermetically sealed. That doesn't work. That does not work. And so that's the other argument and the other piece. Other questions?
So there's some questions.
Go ahead.
What's going? One is, where does the West Bank fit in? And
okay, and then I see Jared's question about the universities. Yes.
Well, there's a bunch on that, but where does the West Bank fit in is one, and one that wasn't put in the chat but was texted to me privately is, why was Israel so unprepared or didn't know this?
So first, the West Bank. And if we can just take a step back on the West Bank. So recall that I said about Gaza that one of Ariel Sharon's arguments about withdrawing from Gaza was that it's much easier to defend a clear boundary and border than it is to be able to defend settlements within a population, an antagonistic population. So the West Bank has many different settlements throughout it, Jewish settlements, many different Palestinian villages and cities throughout it. And so it's, there's much greater worry. And there's really, some of those settlements are the size of cities. So there's great worry about the West Bank, and Hamas has made inroads in the West Bank. And so Israelis and Israeli leadership and Israeli intelligence are worried about if this were to spill over into the West Bank and that there could be a third intifada in the West Bank, or even terrorist attacks, organized terrorist attacks, not isolated terrorist attacks from the West Bank, then, there's the potential for a third front. Israel's already nervous about Hezbollah in the north. If the West Bank becomes an area where Israel has to maintain even more of a military presence, that could be a worry. So there's nervousness. There was a terrorist attack in Jerusalem today, I believe. So I haven't really read any more details except for that happened in Jerusalem. Most likely came from the West Bank. So that's the West Bank, and that is a worry. That's one of the arguments for why people have said, even though the Palestinians or Palestinian leadership doesn't seem to want to peacefully coexist with Israel, that it's in Israel's strategic interest to withdraw from these isolated settlements in the West Bank because they're very difficult to defend, and they also erode Israel's democratic character in terms of being able to hold on to these small settlements. That's the West Bank piece. In terms of why Israel was seemingly so unprepared, the first answer we should say is that most Israelis have been saying that's a discussion for another day. Right now, the only thing we should be worrying about is being unified and defending ourselves and, reestablishing order in the South. And that's the best way to put it. but there's a great deal of speculation, and there's already some pieces of news that are, disturbing. I'll just share what I've read. It almost seems like a replay of the Yom Kippur War, that Israel had the intelligence, but was overconfident and misread the intelligence. There was even one report that I read that Egyptian intelligence warned Israeli intelligence, like something big is happening, you guys got to be ready. And they're like, no. There's another piece of news that I read that Hamas was actively practicing out on the other side of the fence, and Israeli intelligence interpreted that they're just trying to scare us, not they're actually practicing tactics. Probably the most disturbing piece of news that I read was that a division of soldiers was moved from the southern border to the West Bank to provide more protection for what was felt would be trouble in the West Bank, and ended up being, and therefore there was not enough military presence in the South. The reports that the army took in some instances 10 plus hours to get to people is shaking Israelis to the core. The other piece was that Israel was overconfident in the fence, the security fence. And apparently Hamas was able to disable the technology that Israel uses to monitor the fence with a few handmade drones, that they blew up the transmission towers along the fence, and basically, shut down the communication that Israel uses to kind of watch the fence. And so Israelis are like, how can this be that we were so just disabled by a few homemade bombs? So those, the IDF chief of staff said today that there's going to be a full investigation, but that's all for tomorrow. And obviously the judicial reform, some people are speculating that it created a great deal of division, in particular between Israel's political leadership and Israel's military leadership. If they are at odds, then that provides ample space for misinterpreting and not reading intelligence correctly and being overconfident and all sorts of things. And so I think that's going to be a piece of the puzzle too. But that's all for tomorrow, is what most Israelis are saying.
You have a couple questions about the current situation, what's happening on the university campuses. What is the ethical line that administrators at universities like Penn and Harvard and Stanford should take in balancing free speech and anti-Semitism? How can we counter the anti-Israel sentiment that's already starting on college campuses?
How can we counter it? So I think it's the issue is, this has been a problem since before Saturday. Agreed? This is not something that started on Saturday. There are people who are always going to be more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause than the Israeli cause. I think that's just the facts. And no matter what we say, we're not going to convince them otherwise. There are even going to be outrageous examples of people who defend Hamas. And again, I don't think we're going to convince people differently. I think our most important work is shoring up our own defenses internally, in terms of what we say to ourselves, that having confidence in what we believe, and having confidence that we have every right to be in the land of Israel, that we have every right to live our lives, we don't have to, as I said earlier, we don't have to defend every single action that Israel takes. We can say that they're trying their best in a very difficult circumstance. The free speech piece is when it clearly becomes the yelling fire in a crowded theater. I'm still not 100% sure where that line is. We're talking about anti-Semitic and hate speech. But if it's clearly, yelling fire, I think administrators need to take action. It does feel like we're all alone. It feels like the world in some ways, has abandoned us and doesn't understand us. It feels like Jewish lives are cheaper than the lives of other human beings. And this is one thing that I thought of. When the United States was attacked on 9/11, and the United Nations Secretary General, of course, expressed sympathy and support for the United States. The Secretary General, to my recollection, didn't offer a second point was, be sure to exercise restraint when you respond to these attacks, United States. But the sympathy for Israel was like tempered with sort of this, hey, don't forget, you have to exercise restraint. Well, why? It's sort of mind-boggling that Israel is sort of has to respond differently to terrorist attacks and to threats on its civilians' lives differently than other nations do. And that kind of, it's not just upsetting, it's a bit maddening, to say the least. So I think we just have to be sure of our commitments. And I think the difficulty when it comes to the college campus is that, to be very candid, many of our students feel a bit tenuous when it comes to their connection to Israel. And so they have difficulty defending Israel. They have difficulty defending, military action. It doesn't sit well with them. And so I think that's part of it. That's part of this whole thing. They want to be sympathetic, they want to be empathetic, and I certainly do as well. And so you're like, how can you? And so people can't wrap their heads around the idea that you can support a country and a military's right to defend its citizen and be empathetic to both Palestinians and Israelis. And I think that's what we're struggling with.
There's an interesting question that's somewhat related. We know that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and it is not the same as Palestine. There are Palestinians who certainly are not Hamas. But is supporting Palestine inherently anti-Semitic?
Supporting Palestinian rights, or I'm not sure what you.
I guess it's supporting Palestinian rights inherently anti-Semitic. And the person writes, understanding the distinction between Zionism and Judaism is something I've struggled to understand in the past, as I've seen friends be vocal on both sides of the matter. So I think, you can probably interpret it as well, but that there's this whole movement now that, we're not anti the Jews, we're just anti-Israel. We're just anti.
Right. I think it is anti-Semitic when you believe that, the Jewish state should not exist. It is, one can be critical of Israel's policies, as I often am, and not this week, but one could be critical of Israel's policies and not be anti-Semitic. If you're critical of policies, I could be critical of American and U.S. policies. I've been critical from the pulpit of different U.S. presidents. That doesn't make me anti-American. The difference is when someone argues that Israel does not have a right to exist, that somehow this nation exists in a different box than all other nations, that somehow this nation should be denied its right to life, or that its military should not be allowed to defend its citizens. I think that pretty quickly becomes anti-Semitic. But let me also be clear. When you read, which I don't necessarily recommend doing, Hamas's charter and their statements, there's none of this sort of like blurriness that I'm talking about. Jew and Israel and Zionism are all interchangeable. It is rife with anti-Semitism and the worst anti-Semitic tropes. Like it's not just, it's not pussyfooting around this. It is one and the same.
Just somebody else comments that they're struggling with being empathetic to Palestinians. But I think that for that, we have to just distinguish between terrorist groups and Palestinians who want to wipe Israel off the map, and ordinary people who just want to live their lives, who want healthcare, who want schools, who want food for their children, who don't want their children to die. I mean, I think we have both. It was just more of a statement.
Look, I think that's well said. Israel is going after the Hamas terrorists. Innocent Palestinians are going to suffer. Gaza is going to be in worse shape when this is all over. That is, I don't think there's any way to deny that. And that saddens me and it sickens me. But I don't think Israel is by and large responsible for this. I think, could it have done more? Looking back, are there missteps that we can identify? Yeah, but hindsight is always really crystal clear. So I think that's something we should say. Okay.
Two more.
Go ahead.
Well, there's one I'd like to address, and then two more that if people want to stay. There's questions about tomorrow and this Islamic Day of Jihad. Our security people at Beth Torah has said they're not particularly worried, that there's no credible threat that anyone's heard on Long Island. I don't know if they've heard anything in the city, but his comment was the days he worries about are not the ones when people are saying they're going to do something. Everybody's on alert for that, and not to be as worried. Take normal precautions. I hope people will send their children to nursery school tomorrow. I hope people will come to services tomorrow night. We're both going to add special prayers to try to join together in solidarity and community. And the more people we have, the better. And we have security, and we'll be on alert. We'll be safe the same way you are in any situation where there could, you're walking in parts of the city, you're on more alert, but you still go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're all like very attuned to security, but we also shouldn't stop what we're doing. We need to get together for Shabbat. I mean, like, it's just like, do not want to allow the terrorists to deny me Shabbat. I mean, that's something that is in our hands. It absolutely is. And I'm not suggesting don't be worried. I get the nervousness, but they're not going to take Shabbos from me. And we shouldn't allow them to do that to us.
Two more questions. One was asked twice and we didn't get to it, but one, what about the hostages? This was an unprecedented grab. Any hope on bringing them home safely? And then the last one, which is such a broad question, and I wish we had an answer. Can you discuss why Jews are so hated?
Okay. So the hostage situation is rather unprecedented. I'm not hopeful that the hostages will be brought home. There was one Israeli father who was on TV today who said he was glad that his daughter was murdered because rather than she be taken hostage, which is horrific for, can you imagine a parent saying that? I mean, just like, it's just unimaginable. And so I am not hopeful. I imagine that these 150 or however many hostages are spread out throughout the Gaza Strip in different individual locations. I suspect a few of them might be rescued. I don't think many of them will be able to be rescued. And Israel is making a different calculation today. Whereas before, when there was a few hostages, it expended all effort to gain the release of those hostages or try to rescue them. The calculus is very different now, because Israel was attacked, and this is an area of Israel that was attacked that everyone from left to center to right recognizes as within sovereign Israel. This is not some, you'll forgive me, a small settlement on a hilltop in the West Bank. These are established communities within the Green Line. And so the calculus is, we got to protect them first. We got to guarantee their safety. If we're able to rescue the hostages, wonderful, but I don't think that's the priority right now. It's sad to say, but I think that's the situation. And obviously, if they have some specific intelligence, they'll attempt rescue attempts. But I don't expect to see that. I really don't. And it's deeply, deeply tragic. In terms of the question of anti-Semitism, if anti-Semitism has been around for a very long time, and although I am an incredible optimist, I am not optimistic that anti-Semitism will disappear. It may take on different guises. It may appear slightly different. But Saturday's events should sadly confirm that, murderous anti-Semites visit us in nearly every age and every generation. It's a terrible thing to say out loud. And it really breaks my heart that there is such hatred for Jews and the Jewish people. It could perhaps offer us this was one of the reasons why Theodore Herzl imagined we needed a state of our own, so that we would be able to be unified to fight against this. I don't think we're ever going to eliminate it, but I do believe that we will emerge stronger from this, and have renewed purpose. So that's the hope.
Before the prayer, we have one last question that we might answer a little different. Do our congregations have any plans for fundraisers for Israeli citizens and soldiers? I know right now we're recommending donations to Israel Aid, United Hatzalah, which is the emergency first responders, and to UJA Israel Emergency Fund. I know UJA Federation's already pledged $10 million that they send immediately, and then they go back and raise the money. All three organizations work with terror, like victims of terror and trauma, and are on the ground making things happen. And I know Beth Torah is going to try to organize something, maybe where we can invite families and students where they make bracelets and sell them, and then we'll send more money. And if there's a need for things, we'll collect it. And we got a JNF plug. Always, the Jewish National Fund does so much good for Israel. And Mark put the link. I don't know if it's in the whole text or just in my text.
So I would just add that, we're working on, there's a couple of thoughts about, where to direct our tzedakah donations and where to direct our help. So I think, we all want to respond today, and which I think we should, but we also, there's going to be a lot of need down the road. And it's still not even clear what the specific need is. Rabbi Susie which I don't usually call her, but Rabbi Susie Moskowitz, and I agree. I would just add the American Jewish Committee is also an address. I tend to prefer organizations that already have people there and had people there years ago. In other words, not just sending someone this week. In other words, they already have the apparatus and the tools in the communities that they can help. So those are the organizations that in general
Type the message.
those are the organizations that I in general would point people to. We're working on some things that our students can do. I didn't even tell you this, Susie, but Asher, our nephew, is going to deliver some letters that our students are writing to soldiers. Our nephew's in Israel, so our students are going to write them. We're going to scan them and send them to Asher, and he's going to bring them to the soldiers. So that's something we can do. We're going to keep. This is going to be an ongoing thing about what more we can do in response. So, are we going to wrap up now, Rabbi Susie?
Yeah, most people are saying thank you now, so.
Okay, so let's conclude with a prayer. I think that would be a helpful concluding note. And I thank everyone for joining us, and I hope you found this clarifying and helpful. Susie.
For courage and comfort by Rabbi Karen Kadar. Be strong and let your heart have courage, from Psalms. God, hear our prayer. With horror we bear witness to the evil within our midst. We pray that our broken hearts do not become embittered. Let us not give in to cynicism and despair. May we find comfort in our faith and in our community. And may we strengthen our resolve to be messengers of peace and healing, bringing comfort to the brokenhearted. We pray for the soul of our country, Israel. May violence be no more. May the way of our land be for good and not for evil. May the words we speak inspire. May our outstretched arms embrace. May our minds learn tolerance and understanding. Strike the inclination to do evil from the hearts of the wicked. Empower us for good, for life, for love. God, we pray for the children. The children, our greatest gift. The hope in our hearts, the delight of our lives, our future and legacy. The children, dear God, innocent and true. Our children pure in their beauty, proof of goodness and miracle. Our children, the children, dear God, may we be strong and may our hearts have courage. And we say, Amen.
Amen.